Hello ladies and gents, I hope you're well. I hope you had a fantastic week so far. This week I was given the wonderful opportunity to be able to talk to Stuart. Now Stuart runs a leadership coaching community and business that helps CEOs and corporate companies get more out of their team and invest in culture in that respect as well. We were able to talk about everything from marketing, how to get over fears with content creation, especially video, but also some mindset around how you can become a better version of yourself as well. So I'm now going to hand over to him to give a little bit more introduction to who he is and where he's come from. And I hope you took value from this episode, and I'll see you very, very soon.
So hi, my name's Stuart Waddington. I own a company called Star Development UK. I host my own podcast, #Leadership What's on Your Mind. I'm ex-military and I live in the northwest of England. I've got a family of 4, under 10, so that keeps us very busy. My wife runs a business that I started while I was in the military. So we've got quite a busy household, and thanks for having me on. I was really looking forward to it. I always like sharing my story because listening to other people's stories helped me along the way. So it's great to be in a position where it's win-win for both parties, and it always keeps me reflecting. And when I do any of these, it brings out things that I sit down afterwards and go, actually, yeah, I need to focus on that, or I've learned something from just being a guest. So it's a great process. So thank you so much.
No, pleasure, Stuart. And, I think from what I've looked into your journey, and, we were discussing a little bit before as well, I think it's something which is really from the bare bones up to where you are now with content creation, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But what I really wanted to start with, whenever I spoke to anyone that's been in the military or has that military lifestyle, I mean, is there any core principles that you've taken from the military lifestyle and that really serve you now? Because I think there's a lot of people who are maybe ex-military or can take some of what that kind of very, very restrictive, you follow a certain routine, you follow certain orders to do a specific job, can really take into their business, for those who would want to have that rigid, principle and rigid life. I mean, have you found that there's a lot of stuff that kind of crosses over?
I don't know, to be honest. You would think, wouldn't you? That I was very rigid, very sort of disciplined. There's been a couple of things that have surprised me being out of, I always call it the military bubble. And I wouldn't say that I was militarified, if you like. There'll be some people that will disagree with that. And I'll start with saying one of the things that has stayed with me is the timings, and it kind of sits in the background. And I'm a very big picture thinker regards to the business. I like creating a vision of what I'm trying to get to, and it's always changing, it's always evolving. It surprises me every month. I think I make a point of sitting back and reflecting on where I was 4 years ago when I left the military, and we'll come back to that. I was talking about the content creation, etc. But I would say drive and determination sits through everything. And I go from having the drive and determination to join up in the first place. I'm very passionate about doing something I love to do. And when I joined the military, I didn't get in first time. I went away for 12 months, came back again. At the time, and since then, I've realised obviously there's quite a lot of people. It's a long story, but it's quite a unique job I went to do. I was a physical training instructor. The RAF was the only service that you could go straight in and do that role. So there was a demand there, and the only person on my vetting, that there was 16 of us on my first one, and only one person got through, and they were there the year before as well. So not that that's a characteristic that you've got to be twice, but I didn't really perform any better the second time. But the fact I turned up and I had that strong will of this is what I want to do, I'm really passionate about it. That's what kind of still goes through today with what I'm trying to create. I've got a real passion for, I know I'm surrounded by amazing people, through the content and through the business. It's massively evolved, and it does. It surprises me and gives me goosebumps sometimes when I think about it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's something that's really common with a lot of business owners, and especially myself and others who have, you know, started on their journey entrepreneur wise, and they're growing, that they want to do more every day. They try to strive to be more, they try to be the better version of themselves, etc. But I think that not a lot necessarily have the ease or find it very easy to talk about the failures that happen, right? And I think it's really powerful to articulate and showcase that, you know, yes, I'm succeeding right now, but how did I get there, and how did, you know, I fell on my face multiple times to get here, to be in this position where I can succeed, right? And the reason why I put it in inverted commas is because success is something that will change. Success is something which your definition and my definition will be very different, but also my definition 4 years ago was very different to what it is now, and the same in hopefully in 4 years' time, right? And I think that, you know, I mean, what builds off that in regards to a question, I think, is how does someone, when they're starting out, deal with failure? Because in school, or as we grow up, we're told, or what my belief anyway as a dyslexic specifically was, hey, you're going to fail your whole life, and that's a negative, right? You're never going to be able to read and write, you're never going to be able to do this, you're never going to be able to do that, you're never going to be able to do this, because you have this limitation, right? And I think it's about overcoming that concept of like fear and failure, and so how did you sort of get there? Because I think there's a similar story to what you were saying just a moment ago about, you know, you failed and you went back next year and you showed up. Because I think a lot of business owners, they don't necessarily understand that it's actually more important to show up more than it is about winning every day. I mean, how did you, just to reiterate the question, how do you overcome the concept of failure?
So the one thing that, and I've not really spoken about this actually, so as in this perception, that I think it's like a skill, you get better at it. So that just came to mind. There's two examples I'll give. One was the content creation. So I remember that realization that, like, recording content, recording video, it just takes so much time. And I was doing like an hour to create 2 minutes, and it was taking so much stop and start, and there's loads of things to dig into that. And then even to things like, somebody would say, oh, you've made a spelling mistake on one of your posts, and the world would have ended. I would have gone like quick panic sort. And then you obviously realize that not 1,000 people are watching what you're doing when you're starting. Like, you're getting minimal things. And even like that spelling mistake one, or the it was actually in a graphic that I designed, and it was quite a big thing to change it. But the fact of a lot of people I spoke to, they hadn't even spotted it. It was just one person, and they weren't doing it out of spite. It was like, oh, I just would like to point this out. And it's great to have that. But at the time, you can imagine, and thinking back, it's quite comical how much, and I wouldn't even call it stress, but the fact that I had to really be like, oh no, this is bad. Now it's just, oh, thanks, let me know, I'll adjust it, and it's like a skill. But there's a bigger version of that. When I left, I thought my skill set and how I could sort of land on the stage of doing my own thing was to do an event. And it was coming up to the new year. I'd actually nearly done something a couple of years before while I was still in, and it was all around new you, goal setting, New Year's resolutions. Think of them a little bit different, add in a bit of coaching, accountability. Excuse me. And I actually booked out 4 venues, and it's going to sound funnier the way I build this. So they were, all 4 of them were Hilton hotels. One was in London, one was in Manchester, one was in Chester, and one was in Liverpool. And we did all the graphic design, we did all the promoting, we did all the kind of the content. It became, and the capacity of these venues were probably up to 100 people in each one. And obviously I didn't go full like, I'm going to attract this amount of people, but I had that vision that if I did this right, and I've got the ability to have this impact on these people, this is possible. What I didn't realize was nobody knew who I was, nobody knew what I could offer, and there was a massive marketing. And you look at the big events now that go out and the speakers, and I'm in a better position now, but still probably not to that level. And I actually still did the London one, and I think 6 people turned up from having like the capacity of maybe 400 to 500 people. I had 6 people in London. So that was, and I surprised myself, that you would think that was a big failure in sort of like me trying to create business, trying to sell, get money in, pay the bills. I would say 24 hours was the failure period. The rest of it was lessons learned. And the rest of it, my big takeaway from that was, well, at least in the future, when I do another event, I'll be 10 steps further forward than I was when I started this little project. And it didn't cost me. Some people say, well, that must have cost you a fortune. It didn't, because I didn't put down deposits. I did on one venue, which is the one that we did. So we did lose a little bit. But from sounding big and grandeur, it wasn't a epic financial failure, because I didn't have, like, for the first 3 years, or still now, to be honest, I haven't got the capacity to take big financial risks. And I'm not a risk taker, which surprises some people, because then I sometimes, on reflection, say, if I'd have known what the journey was to get to this point when I left, I probably wouldn't have done it. And that surprises some people, because I am risk averse. Even though I had a risk management within my role I turned up into in the military as an adventure training instructor, we had to manage risk a lot and manage people to make sure people weren't staying within health and safety procedures. But I think pushing the envelope has been a little bit more pertinent recently, because I'll go out there and I listened to another podcast recently about the power of naivety, and I'm a people person. I like interacting and talking, and if you just go and ask people, there's some of the people I've hosted on the podcast, they're just people, but they have got some amazing stories, amazing positions, amazing businesses they've had. So yeah, we're slowly getting there. Consistency over time, I always like to say. But yeah, with regards to failure, I think you get better at it, like a skill, the more you do it. Not that I aim to fail, but if I almost say that if you're not pushing hard enough, you're not going to fail. So like that comfort zone area that you need to be.
Yeah, there's a couple of really powerful and really important points there. I mean, from an event point of view, I think a lot of people, especially until they put on their first event or they talk to someone who has put on their first event, it's like 6 to 8 months of marketing for like one day, right? Like that's the main thing that people don't appreciate. Like you have to work really hard to let people know that you have this event on and why it's valuable and what's going on and why people should come. But I think, building off what we were just discussing about failure, until you push yourself to doing those things, whatever that thing may be, right? If it's getting on camera, if it's starting a podcast, if it's starting an event, starting planning it, you have to take certain actions, right? And you have to be in a position where you can push yourself no matter whether it feels comfortable or not. Because people look at what I do and they go, oh, because you're on camera every day, or you run a podcast, or whatever it may be, and you're like, oh, Colin, you must have been really confident and really extroverted your whole life. And I'm like, well, no. If I'm honest, I was introverted for the first 10 years of my life, right? Like people who know my background, I was in game development, and I spent a lot of my time just playing video games, right? But what I learned there was a very interesting social dynamic that happens within the video game world, which you can take into business as well, which is, at the end of the fact, it's people are people, and your people skills and your communication skills is what's going to matter overall. And I think, talking about fear to an extent, I mean, what need did you see? Because so many people ask me, well, why should we create content, right? Because there's loads of things I can sit here and say, but I'm always going to say it from a tinted perspective, because I profit off the concept of creating content, right? Because it's my trade. So for someone who, correct me if I'm wrong, but it isn't your trade necessarily, like you do it, but it's not the thing you make profit on. Why did you see it as something that was really necessary within your business?
Yeah, well, it became quite apparent quite quickly. And I said to you just before we jumped on here that the story of, and I said this not recently actually, but if I'd have told myself 4 years ago, nearly 5 now actually, when I left the military, that back then I didn't know what a podcast was, a vlog, a blog, social media I was on, but just to stay connected to people, not to use as a tool. So it, like I said with the events, it was apparent that people didn't know who you are, what you did, and it's a good medium to share your message and share who you are and the personality and your passion. And I created the podcast off the back of lockdown, and my back was against the wall. It was the start. It was like the first little bit, let's say, of the 2 years that we had of the pandemic. And I had to do something over nothing. So that was my something. And through saying about failure, I'd done a little bit of research, and most podcasts didn't last after 7 or 8 episodes, I think it was, on average. So that was me straight away. I need to do 10. And I did 10. I started 2 podcasts in 2 weeks from just sort of looking and putting a few things together. One was for the fitness business that my wife now runs. One's for the main business, which is the Star Development. And that was the start. And I actually put a post out yesterday or over the weekend about it's our 100th episode coming up in a couple of months. So it's the fact that I remember back then when the focus was 10. So to get to where we are now is brilliant. But why was it? So it was apparent quite quickly that you needed authority. So there's a couple of things that was going on behind the scenes at the time that I actually turned off one of my websites because it was quite evident that I was trying to do everything and not sort of trying to focus. And I wasn't too bothered about getting a new website because everything was you can be online, you can be on LinkedIn, you can be on social media, you can create an audience. But I think fast forward to where we are now, the website is up and running. We're just about to put a lot of money into redeveloping it because now a lot of people can just create content and not have any substance in the background. So you need to now have that substance in the background of credibility, clients, what you do, how you do it. But the kind of I remember back to my first, I think it is my only sort of negative feedback from content. And it was when I started on LinkedIn, and I did a video quite quickly from I've done a few posts, and this person posted saying, "Oh, who's this young guy who thinks he knows loads about leadership?" And I was a bit like, for a second, it took me back. I was thinking, wait a minute, like, where's this from? And it, long story short, it became apparent that this guy hadn't read my bio, didn't know my background, was literally a keyboard warrior. But it made me think, and I was like, interesting. And it almost fueled the fire a little bit. But that was just the start of the journey, that we're in a position now where people know that I'm all about leadership. It's bigger than that because it's more working with teams. Like we work with senior leadership teams, or we'll work with your team building capacity to add value and make it even better and more purposeful, and not just do team building and go back to the office with no thought. Like where's the return on investment for what you're giving your people? But yeah, it's been through wanting a bit of authority and wanting a bit of visibility that we know what we're talking about. And on that as well, I was thinking about this when we were coming on, that I've said this a couple of times, but even though I've got a podcast about leadership and have some amazing people on, I'm the first to say I'm not the world's expert in leadership. I would say my skill set and my expertise are in facilitation and bringing the right people together. We've got an amazing associate pool of 30 plus trainers from several different backgrounds. And the podcast is a tool. Like when my back was against the wall, what do I like to talk about? What would I like to be sharing their stories? And it's leadership. And ultimately, we work around that topic, but it's not just that. It's a bigger, more bigger vision of like continuous professional improvements and where are you going. Like the teams we normally work with, they're not typically the teams that are doing training, because they're directors or business owners that have maybe been in the game 20, 30 years sometimes. And it's not about that. It's that continued professional development and getting those light bulb moments of, I need to pass this on to my team, and this is slightly different, and we'll take somebody that's an ex-CEO of a big corporate up to ex-special forces or ex-Olympian, and they'll be sent into the team to make them think differently. And how can they add that to the business, and all those sort of conversational improvements that we do as a business.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting perspective on like why you should create content, because I really relate to the back against the wall during lockdown thing, because we were doing videos, we were doing this, and I was in my head at the start of 2020. I was like, right, we need to have an audio based solution, right? We need to have something that's just audio based. Okay, cool. So we started the podcast. We did like 2 or 3 episodes, and it was like the stars had aligned to an extent, because at that time I'd also just gone full time. I just got to the point where I was like, right, okay, so what are we going to do? What the content we're going to create is. But then also I was in the position where when lockdown hit, I did the same thing I think you did and went, right, okay, this is an interesting problem. But then I was like, so what can I do to create content still? Because for us, as it's our thing we sell, the thing we make profit on, I had to keep going, right? I didn't have a choice. I couldn't say we're a creative agency who does this and does this and does this and does this, if we are not still creating content and we're still not finding a way through, because we had to lay the footwork so our clients could follow behind us, right? And I think that's the power of the podcast, and that's the power of doing things digitally, is that suddenly, because of COVID specifically, but it was going to happen anyway, you can suddenly connect to people. Like later on tonight, I've got another podcast that we're filming with a lady from America, right? I never would have even comprehended the idea of interviewing people from the other side of the planet. But because I can visually record these and I can do these digitally, I'm not tied to location. But then also I can do it in location now, because we are fortunate enough to be through the majority of COVID, right? For example, at the time of filming, tomorrow we're bringing on a client to talk about how videos helped her business and what she does and that kind of thing as well. So there is a lot of hybrid working right now. And I think so many people, if they're not creating content right now, I think the reason why they don't is because they think it's I don't know. I think they don't think long term enough. I guess it's my assumption, because I think a lot of people, especially now with how uncertain things are, like they're very, should we spend money on this? We need it to return revenue quickly, etc. I mean, what have you found has actually been the return on actually doing it? Because so many of our clients, it takes me a little bit of time to talk to them about, okay, well, we're going to have this longer approach that's going to take time to build a rapport and to be in a position where you can actually be an authority, as you were talking about a little bit earlier, within your industry. So then when someone does need what it is that you do, you're the first person that they think of, right? It's not going to be this instant, we do a podcast just suddenly making hundreds of thousands more.
Yeah, the return has been massive, and it's just an ever-evolving process now. And I've just made a quick note, because I remember when I started, and again, it goes back to the skill thing again. You're trying to find content. You're trying to find things to talk about, even though you've got lots of things that you don't even unlock and you don't even think about. You've got the whole process, and there's a couple of things. So I created an online course, leadership course, funnily enough, just as I decided, right, I'm going to stop doing some of my consultancy work, because this is not what I left the military for. I left to do my own thing. And I've only kept one that I now still dip in and out of. And because of the love of doing it and some of the exposure I get to clients, etc. And I just remember, and that was just before lockdown as well, by the way. So I just made the decision, and then everything got shut down. And but now, over time, there's too much content to put out there. There's the podcast, there's the business, there's the client work, there's all the things I've got to share about the business, etc. But when I was doing this leadership course, I was almost like restricted, because I thought, I'm not going to tell people about the course, because that's the course. Like, I'm trying to attract people onto the course to have this. And then one of my ex-colleagues said to me, well, if you don't tell them the good bits, because you think they're going to disappear and go away with that content, they wouldn't come in the first place. And that was a real light bulb moment for me, because I was like, I could give this course away for free, and I could give all the details of the course. There was probably, out of 100 people, 99 people that couldn't go away with the course and run with it. the actual what they're buying into is you. Like, you're the glue that sticks that course together, because your stories, your experience, and it was group coaching and one-to-one coaching and going through the activities and the so all this, and that was a real game changer, because if you don't put your best content out there, well, guess what? People won't listen and look at your content. So it was a real kind of and a great example of specifically the podcast. We've now got a partnership with a luxury hotel resort in Cheshire, Carden Park, and I'd approached them 2 years prior, and I didn't speak to the right person at the right time. I didn't have the credibility and the kudos that I have now, and the visibility of who I am, what I do. And fast forward to a year, just over a year. No, it was about a year into the podcast. The person who'd initially introduced me, they had a meeting and said, listen, we want to level up everything we do as a business. And they said, oh, I suggest you go and speak to Stu again, because he's been doing some amazing stuff and he's putting some amazing content out there. And it was the week, I'll always remember it, it's the week that we had Joe Foster, the founder of Reebok, on the podcast. So obviously we had the directorship at Carden Park looking at who I was, what I could do. And we had a great podcast with amazing stories. We've got a credible associate team. So all that content we've been putting out there, we had a platform to show people we knew what we were talking about, and we're attached to so many great people that we can put in front of their clients, the people who are going to Carden Park. And the idea is that people who are currently going to Carden Park doing their team development days, we are doing exactly what we've been brought in to do, is to add value and not just tick a box and go back to work. So, and then that builds and builds. So we've had an odd 12 months because it's been Staycation City, and we haven't had what we thought in 2021 February that we were going to go into this new normal, because it didn't happen. But this is the year where we're really starting to get some traction with bringing people back together, but also creating that more hybrid webinars, online coaching, self-learning, guest speakers, and then the face-to-face stuff. So yeah, does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's an important point that I just want to articulate that you mentioned there, which is talking about attention and how it makes you money, right? Like, a lot of what we talk in marketing is around this attention span, right? We're trying to get attention of people, and it's not in a necessarily malicious way. It's for the thing I was discussing earlier, which is about that front of mind marketing concept, right? When you think of video, you should think of me if I'm doing my job right? And that's not because I'm trying to hard sell you, it's because I'm trying to build a rapport so that when you need whatever it is that I do, this could be for you, this could be for me, this could be for a plumber, this could be for a carpenter, etc., that then the person who comes to mind first is that person. And that's the power, I think, the key with the power of content. And the thing is, it takes time, it takes energy, it takes resources, but also you need to kind of exclude your emotional connection to, oh my God, I've done 100 episodes and I expect it to magically mean I get this amazing opportunity. Just because you've done 100 episodes doesn't give you a free pass to get this amazing opportunity. It can, yes, but it happens randomly. It's karma related in some cases, you could say. It's nothing to do with you being entitled. The best thing for you to do is to continually show up, continue to keep on doing it, and then see where it leads you. Because we've done content for a long time and we've been like, it's going to pay off, it's going to pay off, it's going to pay off. It doesn't. And then suddenly, and the analogy I always use when I talk to clients about it is, imagine you're in a glass box and you're punching the roof of the box to get out. The thing is, you can't see the cracks on the top of that box because the cracks are on the top, not on the bottom, so you can't see them. But you could be one punch away or you could be 6 punches away from breaking it, right? Until you continue punching it, you're never going to know until you break through. That's the moment when you know. And it's the same with opportunities. It's the same with like why you do bits of content. And, you know, it's funny you mentioned, because we're nearly close to 100 episodes a while, that's rapidly approaching, which is a bit scary for me. Because I'm like, how did we get to 100 all of a sudden? But we are. and it's the level of consistency, and I think that the also passive thing that we found as well is it increases your confidence, because you have that credibility, you have that authority, but also you can explore topics with people that you otherwise wouldn't necessarily, because you have the backup and the credibility of, hey, I've just talked for an hour about this, so clearly I know what I'm talking about, right? Like, and I think it's so powerful, and the way you have to market nowadays is through you. As you mentioned earlier, a little bit about you being the glue. And I think the traditional marketing and sales of like, hey, we're going to push product can work, but it is slowly phasing out, because people want to get to know people, and people are buying from people more than they're buying from necessarily corporations, because even corporations are starting to put faces and putting people out there as part of their strategies, right? And I think, have you seen a change in the respect of people's habits from your perspective in leadership and what people are really looking for? Because for us, as I say, we've seen a lot more personality driven content really coming through.
Yeah, I think from covering off the content side of things, I've just written down as well that I think the journey of creating content, obviously because I'm running the business and I'm not a personal brand as such, it's not Stuart Waddington Leadership Development. However, I do and again, it might sound, and this is like a mindset that has changed, and I've said it quite a lot about the podcast, but I'd say it about quite a lot of the content we do, is that I'm doing it for me, and the fact that other people like it is a bonus. And people saying about, I literally we're just about to get to 200 subscribers on YouTube, for example. And when we were trying to get to 100, I was really focused on the numbers. And I was like, and we had really good guests on quite early doors, because I was really good at getting attention and asking the question, would you mind coming on? So we didn't have almost the audience to warrant the person I was interviewing, which felt a bit bad sometimes. But we've always got that content now. We're probably going to go back and after the 100, do a little bit of focus on previous guests, because we've now got up to 200. There's probably quite a few people that haven't listened to the previous ones. And it's the process I really enjoy. Like, we've now got somebody, one of our team that does the podcast behind the scenes, Jasmine, who's our sort of business development and podcast lead. So we've gone full sort of circle, and we're going to get even bigger and better, and we'll start really thriving and striving in that space, because it's so important. The personal touch to it, I think, and going back to you saying about the leadership side, I think the leadership journey has fast forwarded. And I had somebody on my podcast that we even talked about the transition of leadership from the Industrial Revolution to factories, to dictatorship, to you just turn up and do your job, to where it is now. And I think people are getting found out if they haven't got that emotional intelligence, that people side of it. There's a couple of the models that we create and put in front of teams sometimes and go, love to know your thoughts on this. And it's amazing how many times you can have like up to 2 hours of conversation around where you should be somewhere on a model, for example. And we don't use a lot of models, as in input them and insist they take those models on board. They're conversation starters. And when you look at people's perception of whether they need to turn up and have emotion in the workplace, it brings up some really interesting conversations, because there's maybe out of a directorship of 10 people in a business, it's amazing how many people have, through just society expecting X, Y, and Z from a leader, how much they are stuck in a mindset of, well, this is what I perceived a leader to be when I was growing up, so this is where I am. and it brings some amazing, and again, we create safe spaces for people to have a bit more trust and honest conversations with each other. And what that leads to is really impactful changes within that team, but also has an impact on the wider business, because that person suddenly has a bit more of awareness of what's going on in themselves and how they're impacting the business. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad you mentioned the level of emotional intelligence that's required in business nowadays, because I think it's something which for a long time, especially as I've grown into business and continue to grow into business, that I think that not a lot of people necessarily did. It was very transactional, it was very dry, it was very, hey, your personal feelings don't matter, you're here to do a job, man up, let's go, let's do it, let's get results. But I think the thing that I know Gary's pushing for, Gary Vaynerchuk, those who don't know, but also yourself and others that I've seen in the business world as well, and also myself, is pushing for an emotional, caring approach towards everyone in business, right? This is not a world anymore where we need to have, and it's the same with competitors, right? Like, it's not this world where someone else who does video has to lose so I can win. It's this concept of actually we can both win and we can both collaborate and we can both, like in lockdown there was micro communities of people who did similar things, just saying, hey, look, how are you feeling? What's going on? Are you holding up all right? What strategies are you using? How are you using your time? How are you looking to build your business moving forward? Are you ready for when lockdown's over so we can get back to filming and etc.? Or what is the reality with the filming and so on? And we were exploring it together. And just having that other person to discuss who's not coming at it from a perspective of this person's trying to take my work, this person's trying to strong arm into my market, I think is really powerful, because it allows you to work so collaboratively, right? And this podcast is a key example of how we're collaborating, and there's so many other examples that we could use, but I think it's the future, right? I think it's the only way forward, personally. I mean, have you...
Well, do you know what? There's a great example of this, links into what I was saying about the whole world that we had for 2 years. I did a few posts and articles about this, about the leaders are getting almost abruptly found out because we had that moment of we can start returning to the office. And whatever that new norm looked like, and I talk sometimes about the sheep mentality of like people were going, right, we're going hybrid working because everybody else is. And the senior leadership team just going, well, we'll do what everybody else is doing. And actually, what's good for you? Like what's good for the business? What's your future look like? But I'd almost link into like content creation linked to leaders' communication, because you had a lot of people who were great leaders, who had that emotional intelligence, who had that vision, who were communicating a lot about what was going on in the business, outside the business. They had buy-in, and they were the ones who had employees who wanted to come back to the office. They were wanting to take part. They were wanting to be part of this succession plan moving forwards. The people who were getting it wrong and not creating content or not communicating or didn't have that connection, their staff were like, oh, I'm quite happy sitting at home, thanks very much. Like it's transactional. I'm an employee. And it was quite interesting to see that play out. And I think we're still on recording this. I still think we're still going through that. I think that's one of the reasons that we're quite busy at the minute, because there's people that are trying to work that out. Like, let's get together with a facilitator, somebody external. And it kind of goes back to sharing a really quick story about me being ex-military. I thought when I left the military that I was going to have a big negative because I didn't have any business experience. But it actually turns out to be a great positive, because people like the fact that we bring different language, we bring different stories, we have a non-bias approach. It's all about asking questions. It's creating what's in the room. We don't go in and go, right, this is who we see you are. This is what we think you should do. There's a co-creation element to when we speak to clients, because who are we to come in and tell you how to run your business? So we are practicing what we preach, and also trying to get that connection with a client. This has only recently come to fruition that I actually don't feel like I sell, because we don't have cold calls. And again, this goes back to you saying about creating content. If you're creating good content consistently over time, even if somebody hasn't spoken to you and they're picking the phone up from your website, they almost have a connection. They know who you are, what you're going to talk to them about. So you've already broken down those barriers of hard sell, if you like, because they know what they're going to be getting as such. So yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I think well, just as you were talking about there, I've met a couple of people who technically it's the first meet and greet, but for me it's the first time meeting them, but for them it's like the 100th time of seeing my face and having a quote unquote conversation with me. And I remember it very clearly because I was meeting a good friend of mine now for coffee at the time, and it was the first time we were met, and it just worked, and the conversation was it just flowed. It was like we had known each other forever and ever and ever, and hand on heart, this was the first time we had met. But what had ended up happening was he had warmed so much to my personality and who I was and who I am because of how much content we put out. It means people know you, right? Especially if you do video, people get to know who you are. So then the only meetings that you end up having are people who are already kind of like, hey, I like this person, right? And we talk about this in marketing a lot, the know, like, trust. The trust element never is going to happen just through content. You have to actually meet the people, see the whites of their eyes, whether that's through Zoom or in a meeting. But you can get to like just through content, because you can get so much of your personality across, you can get so much of what you do and how you do it and why you do it, which is the more important aspect of that, through video like this. The morals behind why, the values behind why, the principles behind why, because at the end of the day, what you do and what I do can be repeated by someone else. There is probably 1,000 people who do leadership development in pretty much similar ways to you, but they're never going to do it identically the way you're going to do it. In the same way, there's millions of other people who can do video, but they're not going to do it how I do it, right? They're not going to take the extra care. They're not going to take the extra elements. They're not going to do it that way. They're not going to do it my way. And to some people, it will resonate well. Some people, it won't. A lot of people, and I think I found as I've grown as well, you could become like Marmite quite quickly. And what I mean by that is some people are going to love you. Other people are not necessarily going to hate you, but they're not going to connect with you from a business point of view. I've got friends who I'll never do business with, but that's okay, because then they're just friends, right? There's also people who we just synergize and everything just works, and hey, did you know we can offer you this and we can help you with this, and it ends up being a cyclical relationship that grows through time, in the same as any relationship would grow. I mean, for me, that's kind of everything I wanted to discuss today, but just before we wrap up, I wanted to give you an opportunity to ask me something if you did have something, or throw in a topic for us to discuss for a couple of minutes, just because I'm conscious of time. So is there anything specifically?
Yeah, so I love your thoughts on this. I was actually thinking, as you were talking, then thinking about something. So we have, this is on my mind, and I'd love to know your thoughts on it. So we have got lots of content now, and unusually it creates a problem. So we have podcasts, we have the business stuff going out. It kind of, even though the podcast is me, I'm very passionate about being about the guest. So their story, they've been invited on to share their story and their wisdom, their expertise, or their story about their journey. So we did have, I tried a vlog series at one stage, but what in your mind is the right mix of personal content, branded content, business content? Because we're just looking at that now, about what is the sweet spot. How do we create? Do we create little projects? Do we go back to the vlog? I don't know.
I think the honest answer is you need to be honest and integral to yourself. I think I don't have any validity or any solution to this, because it's a you thing. It's not a me thing, right? My solution is not going to be your solution, and etc. But what I would always ask is what's going to be authentic to you, right? If that means you do a podcast and that's the only piece of content you create, and then you chop it up and create small clips that then go out as separate content, and then you're dominant through social that way, great, fantastic. If you do a combination of, hey, we've got this thing going on and I wanted to talk to you about it, I'm going to jump on a live really quickly because I had this thought and I need to share it, or we're going to show you in a day in the life of one of our leadership days, or we're going to have a podcast, then we're going to do this and we're going to do that. I mean, the rule of thumb is the more high quality content, the better, right? But what does that mean, right? Because to you and me, that might mean something very different. But in answer to your question, just be honest and integral with yourself, and understand that it's going to change, because your answer to your answer today is going to be completely different to your answer in 6 months, to a year, to 18 months, to 2 years, right? And if it isn't, then that's an alarm bell for me, because it means your business isn't growing and you're not growing. The more important thing is actually you're not growing, because your business will grow if you grow, right? And, as someone who helps leaders and etc., I know you'll know this, but for me, that's why it's important to be integral to yourself. And that's why it's important to be honest with yourself and say, well, are you enjoying this? Like, in the politest way possible, screw what it does for the business. Are you enjoying what you're doing? Because if you're not enjoying it, that will come through and then it will hurt the business. Right? So if you gain stuff from doing it in the business, great. But that should be always a byproduct.
Yeah, the vlog was a little project that we did, and it worked. It was fine, but it took a lot of resources, and at the time it was just me. And we've now got a team that do stuff like that. So that's the focus for the future, that we have somewhere that just works on content. We've got a hybrid version at the minute, and it's great that and you're so right, like what the solution is now is going to be completely different in 2 months' time, 6 months' time. You just remind me, actually, you're saying about my journey through content creation, about that overload, is the fact that we now have like a TikTok channel, because we've got so many mini clips of the podcast. It was a no-brainer. Like, I don't need to show up and add another thing to do in my content. We've already got it. So that's something that the cross-purposing of content has been a really good win for us. And that just has come from learning and giving stuff a go. So
fantastic. And for those people who really enjoyed this conversation and want to hear more from you and want to hear your podcast, or maybe talk to you about leadership, or just to sort of start that conversation with you outside of this medium, how can they best do that? Where's best for people to reach out to do that?
Yeah, so I call them my playgrounds. So one of my playgrounds is on LinkedIn, the Stuart Waddington, and then the Business Star Development UK on Instagram or website, and then hashtag leadership what's on your mind, either on YouTube, or the website is no hashtag, but all the W's, leadership what's on your mind, and we've got amazing guests coming up this year. So and as you heard before, we're nearly coming up to 100 episodes, so you've got a bit of catching up to do.
Fantastic. Thank you ever so much for the time, Stuart.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for joining me, ladies and gents. I hope you took value from this conversation, and I'll be back next week with a brand new guest to have a brand new conversation. It's going to be very exciting. It's going to be great. We've got some great guests lined up, none of which I want to reveal at the moment. But thank you ever so much for coming back and joining once again. If you did enjoy this episode and would like to see more like it, make sure to be subscribed. I'd love to know what you think in the comment section down below, and I will see you very, very soon.